They thought I had nothing left. They thought, the moment my wife's coffin went into the ground, I became a problem to be managed. I was 64 years old, retired, and according to my son and his wife, I was a burden they hadn't signed up for. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my wife had spent the last 18 years of her life making sure that when this moment came, I would be the one holding every card in the deck. My name is Raymond. I spent 31 years as a licensed electrician in Columbus, Ohio. I know how things are wired. I know that the parts you can't see are usually the ones that matter most. My wife Carol understood the same principle, only she applied it to money, to property, and to people. She was the quietest genius I ever knew, and I was too busy being grateful for her cooking and her laugh to realize she had been building a fortress around us for nearly 2 decades. Let me start at the beginning. Carol died on a Thursday morning in September. She went in her sleep, which is how she would have wanted it. No drama, no long goodbyes. The hospice nurse called me at 5:47 inches the morning, and by the time I got to the bedroom, she was already gone. Her hands folded on the blanket like she had arranged them herself. That was Carol. Even in death, she was tidy. My son Derek arrived that same afternoon with his wife, Pamela. They drove 4 hours from Cincinnati and pulled into my driveway with a minivan full of luggage, like they were moving in for a month. I remember standing on the porch watching them unload suitcase after suitcase and thinking it was odd. People usually bring a bag or two when they come to grieve. These two brought enough for a small apartment. Derek hugged me at the door. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn since college. Pamela kissed my cheek and immediately started walking through the house with her eyes moving the way a real estate agent's eyes move. Tallying, measuring, calculating. I noticed it, but said nothing. I was exhausted. My wife had just died. I told myself I was reading too much into things. I was not reading too much into things. The conversation started on the second day. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee when Pamela came downstairs and sat across from me with the expression of someone about to deliver very reasonable news. "We've been thinking," she said, "and we really feel like this house might be too much for you now. Just the upkeep alone. The yard, the gutters, the repairs." Derek and I were looking at some places nearby, assisted living communities. Very nice ones, not the kind you're imagining, and there are a few that have openings. I looked at her over my coffee cup. "Carol died 3 days ago," I said. "I know, Raymond. That's exactly why we want to get ahead of this. So you're not alone and overwhelmed." I didn't say anything else that morning. I let her talk. I let Derek come in and add his part about how the housing market was strong right now and it would be a shame to miss the window. I listened to both of them explain, in calm and reasonable voices, why I should sell the house I had lived in for 27 years, take whatever a facility allowed me to keep, and let them handle the rest. By the end of that conversation, I understood something clearly. They had been planning this before Carol was even gone. The following week, after Derek and Pamela went back to Cincinnati with a box of Carol's jewelry that Pamela said she was keeping safe for me, and 3 pieces of furniture she claimed Carol had promised her, I started going through Carol's desk. Carol had a small desk in the corner of our bedroom, pale wood, 2 drawers, a little brass pull on each one. I had sat next to that desk for 27 years and never opened it once. That was her space. I respected that the way you respect a person's privacy when you love them. After she died, I put off going through it for almost 2 weeks because every time I stood in front of it, I couldn't breathe right. The top drawer had reading glasses, a small Bible with a cracked spine, birthday cards I had given her going back to 1987. The bottom drawer had files, carefully labeled files in Carol's handwriting, insurance, utilities, vehicle records, ordinary things. I went through each one slowly, looking for anything Derek or the attorney might need. At the very back of the bottom drawer, tucked inside a plain white envelope with no label, I found a key. It was small, flat, with a number stamped on it. 7,741. On the back, someone had written 2 letters in blue ink. F. H. I turned it over in my hand for a long time. F. H. First Horizon. The bank on Broad Street, 3 miles from our house, where Carol had a checking account in her name alone. She'd had that account since before we were married, and I never asked about it. Every couple has their private things. That was hers. I drove to First Horizon the next morning. The woman at the customer service desk was young, patient, and professional. I explained that my wife had passed, and I had found this key, and I believed it might belong to a safe deposit box at this branch. She asked for Carol's name, my ID, and the death certificate I had brought along on a hunch. She disappeared for several minutes. When she came back, her expression had shifted slightly. "Mr. Raymond," she said, "your wife listed you as the joint holder on this box. You absolutely have the right to access it." She paused. "I do want to let you know this box has been active for 18 years. 18 years. Carol had been coming to this bank, to this specific box, for 18 years. And I had never known. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment was anger or betrayal. But it wasn't. It was something closer to awe. I thought of Carol at her desk. Carol, on the phone, in the backyard. Carol driving somewhere on a Saturday afternoon and telling me she had errands to run. 18 years of Saturdays. The box was long and metal and heavier than I expected. They put me in a small private room, and I sat down and lifted the lid. There were 4 items inside. A letter addressed to me, in Carol's handwriting. A manila folder. A smaller envelope, sealed with tape, and a photograph of the 2 of us taken at a picnic somewhere in the early 90s, when our hair was dark and Derek was small enough to carry on my shoulders. I picked up the letter first. I will not tell you everything Carol wrote in that letter. Some of it is between a husband and a wife, and it will stay that way until I am gone. But I will tell you this much. Carol wrote that she had watched something happen in families. Her whole life. She had watched children wait for parents to die, like they were waiting for a package to arrive. She had watched it happen to her own mother. She had watched it happen to the woman next door. She had decided, quietly and without any drama whatsoever, that it would not happen to us. She wrote, "Raymond, you were never good at fighting for yourself, so I did it for you. Everything is in order. Trust David Chen. He knows what to do." I set the letter down and opened the manila folder. I am not an attorney, and I do not pretend to understand every line of a legal document. But I have been alive long enough to recognize when something important is in front of me. What was in that folder was a trust document, an irrevocable family trust, established 18 years ago, naming Carol as the original trustee and me as the successor trustee upon her death. The assets listed in the trust included our home on Wicklow Drive, the rental property on Fenway Court 2 streets over, which I had completely forgotten we still owned, a brokerage account, a life insurance policy I didn't know existed. I sat in that small room for 40 minutes, reading the same pages over and over. The house was not mine the way I had always thought of it, as something that would pass through a will and be subject to whatever arguments my family wanted to have. The house was the trust's. I was the trustee. I controlled the trust. My children were named as remainder beneficiaries, which meant they would inherit eventually, but only when I died, only on the terms Carol had specified, and only if they met certain conditions she had written in, with the help of an attorney named David Chen. I opened the sealed envelope last. Inside was a business card for David Chen, estate and trust attorney, with a Columbus address and phone number. There was a handwritten note from Carol clipped to it. "He's been waiting for your call. He already knows everything. Tell him you found the key." I drove home in silence. I sat in the driveway for a while, looking at the house, the brick front, the maple tree Carol had planted, the year Derek started middle school, the porch swing we had bought at a garage sale and repainted 3 times. I thought about how close I had come to letting Derek and Pamela talk me out of this house. I thought about how they had already started moving things out of it. I called David Chen that afternoon. He answered on the second ring like he had been waiting. "Mr. Raymond," he said, "I'm very glad you called. Carol told me it might take some time. She said you would eventually find the key, but that you might sit on it for a while because that's what you do. He said it gently, with a small laugh. She was very thorough. We met in his office 2 days later. David Chen was around my age, quiet and precise, with the kind of calm that comes from spending decades watching families fall apart and knowing how to hold the documents that prevent it. He walked me through everything. The trust was ironclad. Carol had structured it so that it could not be challenged without extraordinary grounds, which did not exist here. The house could not be sold without my consent as trustee. No one could pressure me out of it, deed it away, or inherit it early. The rental property on Fenway Court had been generating income for 11 years. Modest, steady rental income that had been going directly into the trust's brokerage account, which had grown to an amount that made me sit back in my chair and put my hand over my mouth. Your wife was very methodical, David said. He said it the way people talk about someone they admired. She never told me, I said. She told me you would say that. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. She left this note for that specific moment. The note said, "You would have worried. You would have asked questions every week for 18 years. I loved you too much to put you through that. Just enjoy the porch swing." In the porch wing. In the porch wing. I laughed in that attorney's office for the first time since Carol died. It was the kind of laugh that has crying behind it. But still, I want to tell you about Derek's next visit before I tell you about what happened after, because understanding that visit is important. He drove up 6 weeks after the funeral with Pamela and his brother-in-law, a man named Greg, who I had met twice at Christmas, and who had the specific energy of someone who has been told he is going to be paid for his time. I later found out Greg was a contractor. He had come, uninvited, to give an estimate on the house. They arrived on a Saturday morning without calling. I watched them pull in from the kitchen window. Greg got out and immediately started walking the perimeter of the house with his phone out, taking photographs. My house. My yard. The maple tree. Carol planted. I let them come inside. I made coffee. I let Derek explain that he and Pamela had been doing research, and the house needed significant updates to sell at a good price, and that Greg could help them understand the scope of the work, and that they wanted to be realistic with me about the timeline. Timeline. That was the word he used. Pamela sat at the kitchen table where she had sat 6 weeks earlier and said that she had spoken to 2 assisted living facilities in the area, and one of them had a waiting list. So, if I was serious about this, and she really felt I should be serious about this, we should probably put my name down now. Greg came back inside and gave Derek a number. Derek showed it to Pamela. They had a quick conversation with their backs half turned to me, the way adults talk when a child is in the room and they don't want the child to understand. I waited until they were finished. Then I said, "I'm not selling the house." Derek looked at me with the patient expression he had been using on me since his mother's funeral. "Dad, we've talked about this. The maintenance alone. I'm not selling the house," I said again. "And Greg, I appreciate you driving out here, but I won't be needing an estimate." Pamela set down her cup. "Raymond, we're trying to help you. I know you believe that," I said. I called David Chen the following Monday and told him everything that had happened. I also told him about the jewelry Pamela had taken and the furniture. David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, let's move forward." What happened next took about 3 weeks, and I will describe it to you the way Carol would have, without drama, just the facts in order. David sent a letter to Derek and Pamela on behalf of the trust. The letter explained, in legal language I will not attempt to reproduce, that the property at Wicklow Drive was held in an irrevocable trust, that I was the sole trustee with full authority over all trust assets, and that any actions taken to pressure, coerce, or interfere with the trustee's decisions regarding trust assets could constitute grounds for legal action. It also noted, specifically, that certain personal property items belonging to the trust's grantor had been removed from the property and requested their return within 14 days. Pamela called me the same day the letter arrived. I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times. I let all of them go to voicemail. Derek called the following evening. He did not sound like a man delivering reasonable news this time. He sounded like a man who had been told the package he expected was not coming and had not yet decided what to do about that information. Dad, what is this letter? What trust? Mom never told us about any trust. I know, I said. Did you know about this? I do now. Silence on the line. Then, this isn't fair, Dad. We were trying to help you. We were worried about you. I thought about a lot of things I could say. I thought about the suitcases they unloaded the day of Carol's death. I thought about Greg walking my yard with his phone taking photographs. I thought about Pamela sitting across from me calling my home a maintenance problem. Derek, I said, I'm going to be fine. The jewelry came back by FedEx in a padded envelope. The furniture took 2 more weeks and required a second letter from David, but it came back. I want to tell you what my life looked like after all of that settled. My neighbor Earl, who had lived next door for 12 years and who had been bringing me casseroles twice a week since Carol died, came over one evening in November and sat on the porch swing with me. Earl was 71, a retired history teacher, with large hands and a habit of watching the street like he was waiting for something interesting to happen. I told him everything. About the key, about the bank, about the trust, about the letter Carol left me. He listened without interrupting, which is a rarer quality than people appreciate. When I finished, he was quiet for a while, looking out at the maple tree. She loved you something fierce, he said finally. I know, I said. Most people don't have someone who loves them that specifically. He was right. Carol had not loved me in a general way. She had loved me. In the particular, she knew that I was not good at conflict. She knew I would not fight for the house. She knew I would probably let Derek and Pamela walk me right into a facility with a waiting list, because I didn't want to cause trouble. She had structured an entire legal framework around my specific weakness. That is not general love. That is the kind of love that does its homework. I have been the trustee of that trust for 2 years now. The rental property on Fenway Court has a good tenant, a young couple with a baby who shoveled my walk in February without being asked. The brokerage account is managed by a firm David recommended, and it continues to do what Carol intended it to do, provide for my life without requiring me to ask anyone for anything. Derek called me at Christmas. It was a stiff conversation, the kind that happens when too much has been said and not enough has been forgiven. I told him I was doing well. I told him the house was in good shape. He told me Pamela had started a new job. We wished each other a good new year. I did not tell him what I've decided about the trust terms. Carol left it to my discretion whether to modify the conditions under which the children inherit. She gave me that power specifically. I am still thinking about it. I am not a man who wants to punish his son forever, but I am also not a man who has forgotten what I watched from the kitchen window that October morning. Greg walking the yard with his phone, calculating the value of the tree my wife planted. I still sit on the porch, swing most evenings when the weather allows. I have Carol's Bible on the side table by the door. I have the photograph from the safe deposit box framed on the bedroom wall, the 2 of us at that picnic, young and dark-haired, Derek a small weight on my shoulders. Some mornings I talk to her. I know how that sounds to people who don't do it. I don't particularly care how it sounds. I tell her about the maple tree and how it's been healthy this year. I tell her about Earl and the casseroles. I tell her the house is fine, that the gutters I cleaned last fall held up through the winter, that I replaced the kitchen faucet myself the way she always believed I could, even when I wasn't sure. Occasionally I tell her that I still can't quite believe what she did. 18 years of planning. 18 years of quiet, ordinary Saturdays, driving to a bank 3 miles from our house, adding documents to a metal box, building something invisible and permanent, and specifically shaped to protect the man she had decided to spend her life with. She was the fortress. I just had the good sense to live inside it. If you are watching this and you have a parent, I want to say something directly to you. The patience of an old person is not weakness. The silence of an old person is not confusion. The man or woman who seems like they have nothing, who smiles and makes coffee and lets you talk, who doesn't argue when you explain your very reasonable plans, That person has frequently been alive longer than your certainty, and they may have already arranged things in ways you have not thought to ask about. And if you are watching this, and you are the parent, the one who feels like the rooms are getting quieter and the children are getting louder and more confident, I want you to know what Carol knew. You have more time than they think you do. You have more options than they have calculated. And if you have a drawer somewhere, a key somewhere, a name on a business card, go find it. Go sit in that small room with the metal box. Read what's inside. Whatever is in there, it was put there by someone who loved you specifically enough to plan for the exact moment you needed it most. I am 66 years old. I live in my house on Wicklow Drive. I am not on any waiting list. The porch swing is in good shape, and I intend to use it for a long time. That is my story. That is what my wife built for me, while I wasn't looking. And every evening when the light comes through the maple tree the way it does in October, gold and clean and exact, I think about a woman at a small pale desk with 2 brass drawer pulls, folding a letter into a plain white envelope, writing nothing on the outside because she knew I would find it when I was ready, and not a moment before. She was right, of course. She was always right. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have something in a drawer somewhere that you've been putting off looking at, maybe today is the day.